I mentioned we got to a stopping point, not the best, but hard to find a stopping point in 1st and 2nd Samuel because there's a lot going on. I was hoping to get past maybe chapter 11 or chapter 12 last week, but I knew that would be kind of ambitious. But at least get to a decent stopping point, because I know some people that were in here last quarter are teaching this quarter, and some people that were teaching last quarter may be in here this quarter. But we're kind of at a point in 2 Samuel where, sort of like we mentioned with 1 Samuel, there's a point where the action really picks up and there's a lot going on. And that's what you're going to see at this point in the book. It really, really picks up, and it's every time. I think literally in the last 4 or 5 years, when I'm doing my daily Bible reading, when I come to this section, I always end up reading ahead. It's just kind of, it gets into sort of like a page turner. You want to, even though you know what happens, I've read it many times, but it's just very, very interesting stuff. And you see where these Bible heroes, they're people. They make mistakes. They sometimes have problems within their families. Sometimes they deal with backstabbing and hypocrisy, and sometimes that's in their own lives. And the Bible doesn't whitewash any of that, doesn't sugarcoat it. It's there for us to see, warts and all, as they say, and there's a lot we can learn from it. But we're going to pick up with chapter 11. Of course, this is David's sin with Bathsheba. It came to pass after the year was expired, at the time when kings go forth to battle, David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they destroyed the children of Ammon and besieged Rabbah. But David tarried still at Jerusalem. Why David tarried here when it's the time when kings typically go forth to battle, I don't know. But there could have been a good reason for that. Sometimes I've done this myself, maybe in a sermon or in a class, criticize David for this, because it does say it was a time when kings go forth to battle. I'm a little bit reluctant to do that now, having studied it a little more, just because we're not told. There could have been a good reason. It does lead to problems, and David's sin. Obviously, that's not going to happen if he's not at home. But should he have been in battle? Maybe, maybe not. We just don't know. There could have been a perfectly good reason why he stayed, and then this happened. But either way, David could have refused. David could have, bounced his eyes, as we sometimes use that expression in our culture. We have to learn to do that sometimes. Sometimes you're driving down the interstate, you're driving down the highway. Sometimes it's on television. You see something that's not modest, it's not appropriate. The old expression, you can't keep a bird from flying over your head, but you can keep it from making a nest in your hair. So sometimes you got to look away, get away from that situation. In fact, you're going to see a stark contrast with David's handling of this situation versus Joseph. You recall Joseph in Genesis. It's about right around chapter 38, 39, that Potiphar's wife. She is trying to coax him into committing adultery with her, and Joseph not only says no, he flees, he gets away. Whereas David is going to do the exact opposite. He's going to sin for her. So you see a very big contrast. But again, these are people, and that's not to justify it, but it's to remember that these things are written for our learning, because the same thing could happen to any person even to this day. So for whatever reason, David is still at Jerusalem. Maybe a good reason, maybe not. I don't know. It came to pass in an evening tide, so it's evening time, and David arose from off his bed and walked upon the roof of the king's house. And from the roof he saw a woman washing herself, and the woman was very beautiful to look upon. So again, here's a situation where, you see this, you read this today, we see that, think about somebody just out walking on the roof, and that sounds ridiculous, but typically in their culture, and I think many places over in that area today even, roofs are flat. And it was very common to go up onto the rooftop. Sometimes, in fact, in the book of Acts, chapter 10, you have Peter. He's on the rooftop. meditating, praying. They're getting ready to eat downstairs, we might say, down in the house, and he's gone up there to pray. Very common for them, flat roofs. So again, bear that in mind. But here's Bathsheba. She's washing herself. David sent and inquired after the woman. One said, "Is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" It's interesting. David, he has the information. He's not under any misunderstanding here that this is a single woman. Even then, obviously, he doesn't marry the woman anyways. But he inquires, he asks, and he's told. That's Bathsheba. And you could almost hear one of the servants going, it's kind of like sometimes somebody might say, I remember especially as a young man, sometimes one of our buddies would say, "Well, look at her, she's pretty." And somebody would say, "Hey, dude, she's married." And that's somebody essentially says that to David. David's going, "Woo, she is pretty." And again, David should have looked away anyways because she's not appropriate. And by the way, how much culpability Bathsheba has in this, I don't know if I could say 100% for sure, but why are you bathing out just in the open on the rooftop? But David wants to know, who is this lady? And you can almost hear somebody with that they put that sort of spin on it and they say, David, isn't that the wife of Uriah the Hittite, one of your soldiers? So he has the information. Nevertheless, verse 4 tells us, David sent messengers and took her. She came in unto him, and he lay with her, for she was purified from her uncleanness, and she returned unto her house. And of course, the woman conceived and sent and told David and said, "I am with child." So at this point, of course, what are we told in James 1? Let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man. But every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. And for different people, that may be different things. There are people that might say, well, alcohol, that's a struggle for me. Or people may say lust is a struggle for me. It may be different things for different people. But every man is tempted when he's drawn away of his own lust. And the devil, he's not omniscient, but he will try to find out, and he oftentimes does find out what tempts a particular individual, and he will use that. And he certainly did that with David. So David, he's got the information. He sends for her. Again, I'm not trying to shift blame from David for sure, but you also have to consider here with Bathsheba. He sent for her. Could she have refused? She could have said no. Somebody said, well, there would be consequences for that. Well, aren't there always consequences when we choose to do the right thing? Just like there are consequences when we choose to do the wrong thing. I once read about a queen who a king wanted to parade her around before his court, very immodestly clad. And she refused. It cost her the queenship, but she refused. Do you remember that? Who am I talking about? Vashti in the book of Esther. That's how Esther becomes queen. Because these men come to the king and they say, you can't be having that. She just completely refused. And he was drunk and he wanted to parade her around, and she said no. And so even when he sobered up, his men in the court are kind of saying, oh, look, you can't be having this. Now all of our women are going to be refusing, and they're going to be kind of rebelling. And so he decides he's going to make an example of her. But she refused. So Bathsheba certainly could have. And again, I'm not trying to, I think we need to understand that this is not 100% David here. David made a decision for himself, but Bathsheba also, I think, has to bear some responsibility and culpability in this whole account. So she ends up being pregnant, and she sends word to the king. David sent to Joab saying, send me Uriah the Hittite. And Joab sent Uriah to David. There's a verse in Numbers And I always reverse it. I think it's 32. Let me double check that. Sometimes I transpose the numbers on the verse and give the wrong reference. Numbers 32, yeah, it's going to be 32:23. Now, there's a specific context to this, but I think there's a principle here that we need to remember. Moses is speaking to the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe Manasseh. He says, if you will not do so, of course, they said they wanted to have the land Transjordan, and he says, that's fine, as long as you go over and fight the battles for the land with your brethren. But if you will not do so, behold, you have sinned against the Lord, and be sure your sin will find you out. It may not be today, it may not be tomorrow, it may not be right then, it may not be for a few months or years down the line, but sin has a way of finding us out, doesn't it? And Moses told the children of Israel, the tribes there, Reuben, Gad, half-tribe Manasseh, if you don't do this, your sin's going to find you out. David, he's sneaking around and commits adultery with this woman while her husband's away at battle. It's just very uncharacteristic for David. But again, the devil, he tapped into that besetting sin for David, and he lost all sense of reason out of his lust and his desire. And that still happens to men and women even to this day. But now David is, it's going to find me out now. What am I going to do? Well, in his grand scheme here, the idea is get Uriah to go home, be with his wife, and then nobody will think anything of it. They'll think it's Uriah's baby. He underestimated the character of his man Uriah. So Uriah comes. Joab sent him. And when Uriah was coming to him, David demanded of him how Joab did, how the people did, how the war prospered. David says to Uriah, go down to the house, wash thy feet. Uriah departed out of the king's house, and there followed him a mess of meat from the king. David's going to make sure he's got enough. He can go and have a nice dinner with his wife and have basically a party. Go enjoy, the day at home and spend the night. Go be with your wife. But Uriah slept at the door of the king's house with all the servants of his lord, and went not down to his house. When they told David, saying, Uriah went not down into his house, David says to Uriah, camest thou not from thy journey? Why then didst thou not go down into thine house? Man, are you crazy? Go home, be with your wife. Uriah says to David, the ark in Israel and Judah abide in tents, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are encamped in the open fields. Shall I then go into mine house to eat and to drink and to lie with my wife? As thou livest and as thy soul liveth, I will not do this thing. He says, this isn't right, man. For them to be sleeping out in the open field in tents, and I get to go home. All the other men, they're away from their families. They don't get to go home and be with their wives. I'm not going to do that. That's not right. David said to Uriah, tarry here today also, and tomorrow I will let thee depart. So now it's on to plan B for David. So Uriah abode in Jerusalem that day and the morrow. When David had called him, he did eat and drink before him, and he made him drunk. He's sitting there with the king, and the king's got his servants bringing intoxicating drink before Uriah. Bring him some more. Come on, Uriah, you're with the king, drink. And so he gets him drunk. And at even he went out to lie on his bed with the servants of his lord, but went not down to his house. Even when he gets him intoxicated, this man's still got so much character and integrity that he says, I'm not going to do that. Not while my fellow soldiers are out in the field. Came to pass in the morning. Now David's on to plan C, and he's reached a new low here. David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. Uriah is going to carry his own death sentence unknowingly. And he wrote in the letter saying, set Uriah in the forefront of the hottest battle, and retire ye from him, that he may be smitten and die. Joab has no idea what is going on here. David has criticized Joab, for his handling of the matter with, I just went blank, Abner. And rightly so. Joab was very underhanded in dealing with that. And now, how does this make David look when he does something just equally, if not more so, underhanded than what Joab did? But he sends this letter in the hand of Uriah. Put him in the forefront of the hottest battle. Retire from him. Pull back, in other words, that he may be smitten and die. And it came to pass, when Joab observed the city, that he assigned Uriah into a place where he knew that valiant men were. And the men of the city went out and fought with Joab. And there fell some of the people of the servants of David, and Uriah the Hittite died also. I don't know if you write in your Bible or not, or if you like to underline or highlight. But I think there's a phrase here that probably gets overlooked quite often in this. At least I can only speak for myself. I've overlooked it most of the times that I've studied this, if not all. But it's that phrase, there fell some of the people of the servants of David. Uriah is going to die because of David's sin. And there's a lesson in that. Sometimes bad things happen to good people through no fault of their own. Uriah showed the utmost integrity and character throughout this account. And yet he ends up dying. But you and I, we need to understand that our sin doesn't affect just us. David, his sin affected Uriah, but also these other men. Sometimes our sin can have consequences that extend even to other people. So, not just Uriah, but some of the other people of the servants of David died under David's order to put Uriah in the hottest part of the battle and then draw back. A tragic thing. And again, you see the nature of Joab. He's not very scrupulous, because Joab doesn't question this. He doesn't say, well, that's strange. You can almost just see Joab going, well, I guess he's human after all, sort of thinking maybe David took the high ground before in that matter with Abner, but, here he's doing something very similar. But Joab sent and told David all the things concerning the war. He charged the messenger, when thou hast made an end of telling the matters of the war unto the king, and if so be that the king's wrath arise, and he say unto thee, wherefore approached ye so nigh or near unto the city when ye did fight? Know ye not that they would shoot from the wall? And he references Abimelech, the son of Jerubbesheth, who was killed when a woman cast a piece of millstone upon him from the wall. He says, if David gets upset and says something like that, tell him there at the end of verse 21, thy servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. So the messenger came and showed David all that Joab had sent him for. The messenger said unto David, surely the men prevailed against us, came out unto us into the field. We were upon them, even unto the entering of the gate. And the shooter shot from off the wall upon thy servants, and some of the king's servants be dead. And thy servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. And watch David. Well, he really, my mom and dad used to say a lot of times, they had an expression that sometimes somebody can talk so sweet, and usually it's referencing fake. They say sugar won't melt in your mouth. That's David here. David says to the messenger, thus shalt thou say unto Joab, let not this thing displease thee, for the sword devoureth one as well as another. Make thy battle more strong against the city, and overthrow it, and encourage thou him. Isn't that nice of David? I mean, isn't that wonderful how he's not getting upset at his military commander for so foolishly going that close to the wall so men would be shot and killed with arrows? He says, look, this happens. There are casualties in battle, and we just have to understand that. And I tell you what, just you guys keep at it. Strengthen your hand for the battle, and go encourage Joab and take that city. It is so fake. It is so hypocritical. The messenger doesn't know that, obviously. God knows it. Joab knows it, and now you and I, of course, reading this, know it. Yes, sir. I've wondered that myself. If Uriah delivers the letter. I don't know if he went back with an entourage. If so, I mean, it would seem it's the king's court, and there's a lot of gossip and a lot of talk that goes on around the castle, no doubt. Somebody knew for sure. Even if it was suspicion, maybe they just put two and two together. No doubt David is being very secretive about this, but at the same time, Numbers 32:23 still rings true. Be sure your sin will find you out. That's beyond just God, because it's not talking about God, because God knows from the get-go. So I think there's, and it may very well be. I don't know. I don't know if I could say one way or the other on that, but I think there's a pretty good chance that Joab might have known about this, and somebody say to him, maybe Joab's reading it, saying, this is weird. Why would David tell us to do this? And maybe somebody comes over there and who came, with if there was indeed an entourage, and say, I'll tell you what's going on. The king has been with Uriah's wife, and maybe they didn't know she was pregnant. Maybe they just said something's going on with this. But I think there's at least a very good chance that he did know. and again, Joab, not a very scrupulous man. So he's not, obviously he's not going to say, oh, I can't do this. That's dishonorable. So he just, that's the king's command, whatever. Joab, on a couple of different occasions, and he's not done yet, will attack a man who really is defenseless. So that's Joab for you. But Uriah is killed. When the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah, her husband, was dead, she mourned for her husband. This is another thing I've wondered. We're never told. Does Bathsheba know David had her husband murdered? How do you not? I mean, maybe she just thinks strange coincidence, but that's awfully coincidental, isn't it? There's no indication that she was ever told. I wonder if maybe she do what? Yeah. I mean, I wonder if she ever just point blank asked him, did you have my husband killed? I don't know. But that's what a tangled web we weave, right? Yes, sir. Yeah, they're detailed, I think. Yeah, I was going to say the last part of 2 Samuel. We'll get to that. But yeah, that's a good point. This is not just, not that it would have been, not that it would have been less despicable, but this is not just a, run-of-the-mill foot soldier. He's one of the mighty men of valor, as Jimmy pointed out. And what is that chapter? 23. We'll get to that in chapter 23, where it kind of goes back and details some of those mighty men of valor. But yeah, he would have been fighting with David, following David for a long time. He's loyal. He's a great soldier. We would kind of think of him maybe in our terms today, maybe special forces type. They went on at least one covert mission that Jimmy mentioned. David is just sitting there one day and he says, boy, I would love to have a drink of water from that well in Bethlehem. And he's just kind of, he's not trying to send anybody on a mission. He's just sort of sighing, boy, I remember that. Maybe he's thinking of his days in his youth and how he used to go to that well. And that was some of the best water coming from that spring and the ground. And these mighty men decide, we're going to get David a drink. So they break through the enemy lines. They bring him back water. Of course, David won't drink it. He pours it out. He says, these men have hazarded their lives. I can't just drink that water. He poured it out to the Lord. That's kind of like a drink offering. But these men, Uriah being one of them, they were tough dudes. So he's been loyal to David. He's been faithful to David for a long time. And it just, again, you see the humanity here of this king of Israel, David. So when the mourning period is past, David sent and fetched her to his house, and she became his wife and bare him a son. Don't miss that last phrase. But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. And you and I may do something, and we may hide it from everybody else, but you better believe if it's something that is against the will of God, the thing displeases the Lord, and He knows. And so we don't know exactly how long it passed. It seems that this would be close to the time that the child is born, or maybe right when the child is born. We're not told exactly when. But the Lord sends Nathan, chapter 12, to David. He came into him and he gives him this parable, the parable of the ewe lamb. And basically the parable is that here's two men in one city. There's one rich, there's one poor. The rich man has all these flocks and herds. The poor man had nothing. He just had this one little ewe lamb. He brought it up, nourished it. It grew up together with him and his children, kind of like a pet to them. And did eat of his own meat. They fed it. Maybe it came to the table or whatever, it's kind of the idea we might say. Drank of his own cup, lay in his bosom, was unto him as a daughter. It's just like, we kind of like we would say, if somebody has a favorite dog or something, just like one of their children. There came this traveler to the rich man. He didn't take of his own flock. He's got all these flocks. But the rich man doesn't take that. He goes and forcibly takes that one little ewe lamb that the poor man had. And he kills it, and he dressed it for the guest who had come. And David got blinded in his lust and his attempt to cover up his sin, his embarrassment, his shame. And boy, there's a lesson in that. Just sometimes you just need to come clean instead of, sometimes something is very embarrassing, it's very shameful. But you're far better off to admit the shame, to admit the embarrassment, and get it out in the open, repent, deal with it, than to try to cover it up, because it just gets worse and worse. But David is still a compassionate person. And he understands this is not right. And it's ironic, because he's furious. Angry. And he said, as the Lord liveth, the man that hath done this thing shall surely die. And he shall restore the lamb fourfold, because he did this thing, because he had no pity. And of course Nathan says to David, 4 little words, thou art the man. That's you, David. You talk about some courage. I can't imagine Nathan standing before the king and having to tell this story, and as the king gets so angry, and I'll tell you what's going to happen to this fella, and then to turn around in the midst of all that anger and say, David, that story's about you. You are that rich man. And he goes on, of course, and says, thus saith the Lord God of Israel, I anointed thee king over Israel. I delivered thee out of the hand of Saul. I gave thee thy master's house and thy master's wives into thy bosom, and gave thee the house of Israel and of Judah. And if that had been too little, I would moreover have given unto thee such and such things. Wherefore, why have you despised the commandment of the Lord to do evil in his sight? You killed Uriah the Hittite with the sword. Just as surely as if David had run him through himself, he killed him. And hast taken his wife to be thy wife, and hast slain him with the sword of the children of Ammon. Now there are some consequences, David. Now therefore the sword shall never depart from thine house, because thou hast despised me, and hast taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be thy wife. Thus saith the Lord, behold, I will raise up evil against thee out of thine own house, and I will take thy wives before thine eyes, and give them unto thy neighbor. And he shall lie with thy wives in the sight of this sun. For thou didst it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel and before the sun. And David says, I have sinned against the Lord. And Nathan says, the Lord also hath put away thy sin, thou shalt not die. Howbeit, because by this deed thou hast given great occasion to the enemies of the Lord to blaspheme, the child also that is born unto thee shall surely die. So 3 consequences. The first 2 are related. The sword will never depart from his house. Evil is going to rise up from within his own house. and the child that was born is going to die. There are strict consequences. By the way, going back to the parable of the ewe lamb, I heard this expression one time, and boy, isn't it true? But the expression is, let me make sure I say it right. My sins look worse on you. You ever heard that? I heard that for the first time, I don't know, probably 6-7 years ago. I heard a preacher say it within a sermon. My sins look worse on you. Well, when I look in the mirror and I see my sin, I say, well, I'm not as bad as some people. And, and we start trying to kind of justify and soften. But then you could take something that's the exact same thing one person's doing, and tell it to that same person about someone else, just like this ewe lamb. Here's a rich man, and he could have had anything he wanted, but he took that one little ewe lamb. Ooh, David's sins look worse on somebody else, didn't they? He's furious. He's angry. My sins look worse on you. That is a very true statement. And so David's sins, when he heard them on somebody else, he saw it not in the mirror, but looking at someone else. Boy, it looked really bad. Now he's upset. I know we're getting close to running out of time. I know we're near the end of the chapter. No, we're not. The child is going to get sick. David is going to fast and pray. And, of course, when they come, and they don't even want to tell him the child is dead. David figures it out. He just point blank asks, is the child dead? Yes, David, the child is dead. And David gets up. He washes himself. He anoints himself. He goes and eats. And the servants are kind of saying, what's up? I mean, we tell you the child's dead. We're fearful to tell you. We think you're going to go into a rage or, grieve yourself to death or something because you were this bad when the child's sick. And David says what? Well, I prayed and I fasted because who knows? Maybe there's a chance we could change God's mind or something, and maybe God will grant grace or whatever. But now the child is dead. There's nothing else we can do. And David says what? That we so often quote at funerals. I can't bring him back. But I can get up, I can follow God, I can be faithful to God from here on, and I will go to him. And that is certainly true even to this day. Faithful dead that have gone on, and of course children being innocent, they're not saved, they're safe. There's nothing to be saved from. Children are born sinless. This child being safe, David says, I can go to him. So, then at the end of the chapter, David goes in to comfort Bathsheba. She conceives, and Solomon, of course, is born. I was looking for it. Verse 26. Joab fought against Rabbah. Joab basically, he sends messengers to David and says, look, I've fought against Rabbah. I've taken the city of waters. Gather the rest of the people together and encamp against the city and take it, lest I take the city and it be called after my name. So he goes and he does that. And he took the king's crown from off his head there in verse 30, brought forth the people that were therein, and he makes them servants. And this is, again, what were they supposed to do with the people? Going all the way back to Joshua and Judges? Supposed to utterly destroy them. This is judgment from God. But here again you have making them servants, and they end up being a snare to the people, turning their hearts away from God. Before we run out of time, I wanted to mention, sometimes the question comes up, do you see is there any question here as far as, well, I'm just going to say it, I wanted to see if anybody had noticed it. Maybe you caught that David wasn't executed. Adultery is a capital crime, right, under the law of Moses. Remember in John chapter 8, they bring the woman taken in adultery, and they say, Moses said she should die. And that's true. There are two things to remember here. Number one, we don't have the 2 or 3 witnesses. Under the testimony of one witness, no one was ever allowed to be put to death. You had to have 2 or 3 witnesses. People in the court probably knew, again, as Robert and I were mentioning earlier, probably put 2 and 2 together. But you don't have any indication there's those 2 or 3 witnesses. There might have been 2 or 3 witnesses. And the law did say that the adulterer should die. But who has to carry that out? The people. So there are 2 possibilities. The people may not have done what they should have done in this instance. I don't know that that's exactly the case here, because Nathan does announce to David, thou shalt not die, as if this is coming from God. It may be that there were not the 2 or 3 witnesses. God is not just making a special exception here for David. It's like, oh, this is David. I'm going to overlook my law for David. That's not the case, because David is going to suffer greatly for this. So it would seem to me the best explanation here is there are not the 2 or 3 witnesses. You've got to have those witnesses in order to put someone to death for any kind of capital crime under the law of Moses. But sometimes that question comes up, so I wanted to address that. We'll stop there, and Lord willing, we'll pick up next Sunday with chapter 13. I thought we'd get further, but sometimes it takes a little longer to get through that because David's sin with Bathsheba is such a turning point. But, buddy, in chapter 13 is where it really, really begins to move quickly. We'll talk about Amnon, Absalom, Tamar, and all of that goes along with that. Thank you very much. We'll have a break before worship this morning.